Hello and welcome to another edition of The Next Step, the podcast dedicated to helping talent acquisition leaders, recruiters, employer branders take the next step with AI. AI can be a big, daunting, messy, expensive proposition. We're going to try and make it easy by helping you take just one next step. This podcast is not sponsored by any AI companies. I'm not getting money from them to mention these products. I'm using products that either I use or are very easily off the shelf at a low cost. You know, you're talking $20 a month sort of situations. So this is really not about how do I promote a tool. It's really about how do I get you to see the possibilities in these tools. Because if you don't start to embrace AI, as the old saying goes, you're not going to get replaced by AI. You're going to get replaced by someone who uses AI. So it might as well be you who uses AI to make your job a little safer, a little more valuable. Couple of notes real quick. If this kind of idea is really useful, I've got a separate newsletter called ideaoftheday.substack.com. It is one single recruiting employer brand idea every single weekday. It's a super small email. It's just one idea. Throw it away. I don't care because chances are after 4, 5, 10, one of them's going to stick. One of them's going to be really useful. And that's really how it's designed. So check it out at ideaoftheday.substack.com. Otherwise, check out my website, Employer Brand Labs. Learn more about employer branding using AI, using data, using research tools. There's a lot of stuff there. There's a lot of brand new reports that I think you might be really interested in checking out. So go to employerbrandlabs.com. Okay, let's get to the meat of the things. Here's the deal. I was at TA Week last week, and hey, everybody, Kara, for inviting me. Thank you so much. For those of you who are there for Employer Brand Day, maybe you caught my session. Hi. If not, maybe you caught Audra Knight's session, where she led a panel of some pretty smart people about AI in general. I don't think it was a specific AI topic, but one thing caught my eye, or yes, let's call it my eye. And that is, Audra asked the question at the top of the session saying, hey, what are some questions you have that maybe we should get into? And I was kind of blown away by the answer that popped up by 10 different people. Like it was like the same answer. And that was Notebook LM or Notebook LLM. Now I think it's technically Notebook LM. It doesn't matter. You know what I'm talking about. It's the notebook tool, right? It's the one that comes with Google. And I think that's why everybody was so keen on it, right? Everybody kind of gets Gemini a little bit, but then Notebook's this weird thing that doesn't quite, what do I do with it? And that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about a couple of cool things you can do with Notebook LM today as a TA leader, as a recruiter, and as an employer brander, okay? So I think there's 3 ideas here we want to embrace. Now, the first idea is interesting. Okay, so let's take a step back. Notebook LLM, or I'm going to say LLM every time. I'm trained now. Notebook LM is really about collecting a bunch of stuff in a box in what they would refer to as a notebook and kind of looking at that or using that. It's a subtly different way from doing, say, a custom GPT. Some people do it that way. Notebook is really about saying, hey, give me a bunch of documents and I will use that as kind of the basic training idea for everything else we're going to do. And they keep those notebooks for the long term. So you can build a bunch of notebooks and reference them as needed. So one of the things I thought was, why not build a notebook for every one of your hiring managers? So this is for recruiters. One notebook for every hiring manager. And what do you put in it? Well, what I do is I put in that hiring manager's LinkedIn profile. I would pull in, if you can find their resume, throw it in there. I mean, let's be fair. You have access to HR system. See if you can pull their resume. That I don't know if that's legal. You figured out. I would take all your notes from intake and strategy meetings with that hiring manager. I would take all the job postings that that hiring manager wrote. I would go into the Google Drive or Teams Drive or whatever you've got to kind of find all the stuff that they've written for work and scrape some recent stuff. And I would put that all in a single notebook. And I would say, okay, these are my, you explain to it, hey, I'm building a notebook around this hiring manager, give it the name and say, this is their LinkedIn profile. These are the notes I've taken from intake meetings. This is stuff they've written, stuff they've done. This is the team they're working, and just give it as much information as you can, as much context as you can. Then for every new intake or strategy meeting where you're setting up a new requisition, you go to the notebook and say, okay, for that particular hiring manager, and you can say, okay, we're going to hire an X based on everything you know about this person. Let's cut to the chase. Let's figure out what you're going to build an intake form, right? You've got one of those and you kind of check it in. have it pre-filled out. You've already worked with this hiring manager. They know what they do. You've given the LM, the notebook LM, all the forms that you've built. It does the, hiring managers tend to do the same stuff over and over again. So pre-fill it out, get it as close to done as you can, so that when you walk into the intake meeting, you say, hey, this is usually how you do it. Is this still how you want to do it? And suddenly you look like a genius. Then say, okay, based on all previous jobs, help me write the job posting. Help me identify how they like to talk about this job. Every hiring manager is a little different. Everybody uses a slightly different vernacular, or they lean into different areas in a given job. You can pull all that information so you can figure out what are the particular predilections of that hiring manager and walk in. It's not personalized where they notice it, but you can make it pretty clear that you've done your research and you know them pretty well. And that starts to build the relationship, build that rapport, and they start to trust you more. And the best part about an LM is that or notebook LM is you can keep adding information. So in your intake notes, you can say, I noticed that they're making these changes, or they're starting to look for this information, or they're starting to ask these questions. If you could even go back to interviews and start to look at your interview notes about the questions they ask, throw that into. That lets notebook LM kind of create a picture of what that particular hiring manager cares about and how they function. It really helps you as a recruiter get more done. Okay, so this next one is kind of a continuation, but instead of being specifically about the hiring manager, this is about job family. So developers or QA or nurses or product managers or marketers or salespeople, whatever it is, you're going to make a job family notebook, and you're going to throw in all the job descriptions you can from that family. And you're going to throw in all the competencies you can find. I would go Google and say, hey, for this kind of job, what are the standard competencies we should care about, and throw that into. Go look for any notes you have from your intakes about those roles and what they're looking for, any notes you might have about how these roles are different. For me, in an intake meeting, that's kind of where the crucial information is. I don't need to know that the developer needs to know the following 7 programming languages. What I really want to know is, in what way is this particular developer role different from the 90,000 other developer roles open right now? Because that's useful information, right? I'm looking for deviances. I'm looking for changes and things that are not obvious. Collect all that stuff and ask Notebook, hey, just give me the 5 behavioral questions I need for this particular family based on who we are. And it's going to start to learn how you see things. Now, you've thrown in external data, you've the core competencies for these roles, but you're also throwing internal data. So it's starting to learn the world from your point of view, from your company's point of view, what it cares about. And it's going to start to identify, okay, these are generally what we should be looking for. And these are some general behavioral questions, which is useful because you're probably doing some behavioral interviewing. But then you go back to the hiring manager and say, hey, at the intake, these are the behavioral questions we think we want to ask. How close was I on this? And this suddenly becomes a game of, you can use this information to go back to and re-inform the notebook. Hey, these are bad questions, but these are better questions. And the notebook starts to learn and gets more and more attuned to how you do things. You might say, suggest questions that uncover the candidate's kind of ability to work in this space. Right? Let it think. Let it kind of think as a human might, and it's going to collect a lot of stuff. It's not actually human. It's not actually reasoning, but it's going to collect a lot of stuff. And you might even say, what would a level up be from this? Like, if we want an exceptional candidate in this space, what questions would we ask? What should we be looking for? What are some phrases? What are some skills or experiences that we should be looking for? And that's going to make you look really smart to your hiring manager. And finally, you might say, hey, what are some red and green flags that might pop up in the interview based on all these questions? So you can ask for behavioral questions and say, okay, this is useful, but you can also kind of pre-fill out answers. Hey, if they talk about X, this is a red flag. And if they talk about Y, this is a green flag. Again, bring it to the hiring manager and say, hey, is this a good way to kind of describe the job? The problem with hiring managers and recruiters is they are talking about an abstract thing. People in the aggregate, personas, which aren't real, right? You're not hiring personas, you're hiring a person. And it's very easy to not be on the same page. It's very easy to get misaligned. But if you start to bring things to be more concrete and say, here are questions, here are specifics, here's behavior questions we want to ask, here are red flags. Do you see this as a red flag? You're starting to learn how they see the world, which you're then taking back to the notebook to say, hey, help me kind of refine this point of view. What you're going to get is a way smoother recruiting process, because at the intake, you will have already baked in the interview questions. You've already set this whole process up. You're not making it up as you go along. You've built the whole process, or at least asked Notebook to kind of do a lot of that stuff for you. Okay, third one. This is from an outreach standpoint, maybe sort of akin to employer brand, maybe still recruiter space, but it's for the role, make a notebook. So if this is not something you do for every role necessarily, this might be for your hardest to fill roles, your senior vice president of whatever kind of roles, the stuff where it's like, oh, there's a lot of visibility on it. This is where I'd save this role. So what you're going to do is build a notebook just for that role and say, okay, here's the job posting. Here is all the notes from intake and the hiring managers. Here's our, our goals for the company. Hey, we're hiring this person to achieve X because X allows us companies to do Y and Z, right? We got to get out of this idea of we're hiring inside this tiny, we're seeing the world through a drinking straw, and that's the way we're hiring. We hire people to solve problems because they're having solved them, the business grows. Connect those dots and make that crystal clear. Then, once you throw all that information and you say, hey, create a candidate persona for this role, for a classic role for this. And this is where you start to set a baseline of, look, this is where a good candidate might be. You're also saying, hey, because, let's be fair, some hiring managers just want a good candidate. They all say they want best, but in some cases they can't really afford it. And again, we're getting out of this role where we're getting out of the abstracts and the talking in misaligned, broad vaguities. That's not even a word, but you understand what I'm saying. And into something concrete and specific. We're making language clear so that everybody's speaking the same language. You can say, hey, based on all this stuff, this is what a good candidate should look like. Hiring manager, is that correct? Did we get it right? Okay, if so, LLM, or notebook, I keep doing this. What would a great candidate look like? And then you can use that as reference to feed back to the notebook to say, okay, the hiring manager doesn't want those things, it wants these things, and it's going to completely reinform the notebook what they should be looking for. Once you have that, generate 3 outreach messages, build a screening metric to kind of decide how to screen those candidates to make sure they have the right skills and the questions are standard. So you're, kind of evaluating people on an apples to apples level. You can even kind of draft some Slack posts that recruiters can use to share this material internally, right? This is the nice thing about LLM is that it's not making poetry. We're not here to write love songs using LLMs. What we can do is say, look, we all know the dread of the blank page of going to Slack or going to email or going to whatever and say, I need to say, what do I say? And you kind of sit there for 5 minutes going, how do I start this? And you get all in your head. This is where LLM really shines as a generative tool. It can just say, just make a simple, clear message asking for this. It gets you there. If you have to tweak a few words, that's fine. But trust me, it'll do it in 10 seconds, whereas you will stand there sitting there thinking about this for a couple of minutes. And that's a horrible use of your time. So you can start to draft that stuff. Now, this sounds like recruiting stuff. So why am I talking about this as recruiting and employer branders? Well, this is where we can help everybody see the value of the employer brand at where the rubber meets the road kind of situation, at the real grassroots groundswell kind of level. And that is, hey, if this is the role and this is how we communicate it, now glue the brand on it and say, based on this, let's rewrite this content so that the hiring manager can understand, oh, that's how the brand works. That's how it's making this useful. We no longer sound generic and boring like everybody else. We are suddenly specific in what we're looking for, specific in what we're asking for, how we're positioning ourselves. Also, that brand should probably inform the kind of perfect archetype for that person. Do you want someone who's super autonomous or do you want someone who's super collaborative? Do you want someone who needs a lot of management or do you need someone who really is working for this broad mission? And they're very different hires, right? And not all are going to fit the same way. This is where you can start to use the notebook to kind of inform everybody at a very detailed, granular level. This is how the brand helps us make better decisions. It then builds your messaging. It then kind of figures out your sourcing channels and all that stuff to really help you kind of go beyond. Personally, one of the things I've noticed in my career is that recruiters tend to get stuck in a rut. And I'm not blaming recruiters. The world has put you in a rut. The world has said, we're going to optimize you and make you more efficient. We're going to make you do a thing and we're going to do it exactly the same way every single time. They've treated the process of hiring like an assembly line. And the ATS is the actual assembly line, right? It's forcing you to do it a certain way and say certain things. And somebody's going to come to your desk and kind of smack you on the hand if you don't do it right. And it's like, oh, fine, I'll do it right. It's all an effort for optimization, right? Here's the thing. hiring managers don't care about that. What they want is the best talent. What they want is the best hire, the right fit, the person who's going to bring value today. And I'm going to tell you, one of the biggest things that hiring managers come push back on is the sense that they're treated like, not like a client, but like just a cog, someone who's just, okay, you are the inputs for this machine and I'm just going to grind through it. When the hiring manager sees the recruiter doing something different, that's when the hiring manager goes, oh, good, this person understands my needs. They're adjusting the process to suit my needs. They're not just doing it the same way we do it regardless of inputs. They're not just following the recipe. They're starting to really understand us. And that's really how the recruiter and the employer brander can kind of help set the TA team up as consultants rather than the people who are just grinding the machine to get the hires, the B to B plus hires at the end of the machine, right? This is where, because you can suddenly say, okay, we're going to say, here's the brand, which is standard, and here's the role, which is different, and here's what the hiring manager needs, which is very personalized, and glue it together to turn into personalized marketing, personalized conversations, personalized outreach, not the standard you do it for everybody, but this is specific to the role. So this is one of the subtle values of using an LLM, because let's be fair, recruiters don't like to write. Most people who don't write for a living don't like to write, right? Writing is difficult. It's challenging. It's a lot of work. And so consequently, you use the same stuff over and over again. It's just easier. But if you have the LM, the notebook, start to define and say, oh, you're talking to this audience? I would say it differently. You can start to personalize that message. And again, because these notebooks last, right? They're not just like to me, ChatGPT, a conversation with ChatGPT feels like a one and done. It's an instance. It's a true conversation. I know they're archived, but if you've used the ChatGPT a lot, you've noticed that stack of conversations is really hard to find the thing you were looking for. Whereas if you build a notebook, it can be defined. You can title it. You can say, okay, it's this thing, and you can make it easy to find later. And you should be using it over and over again. You should be accessing it over and over again. And the act of using it and re-uploading updated materials makes the notebook smarter each time you use it. It is an iterative process. So thanks to everybody who showed up to TA Week and asked the questions about Notebook LLM. Hopefully this was a useful kind of primer into getting your feet wet, because I really know that once you take advantage of AI tools, you will become far more effective, far more valuable, and let's be fair, a little safer at the job. So thanks so much for taking the next step with me. Do me a favor, if this was useful information, you got to tell a friend, you got to tell people, you got to post it on LinkedIn, you got to follow it, you got to subscribe, you got to do all this sorts of stuff. If you want to get the email that says, here's where the new next step episode is, the URL's at the bottom. It's a Substack link. Do subscribe. It is 100% free, obviously, and I want to make sure that you get what you need to take the next step. Thanks so much. I'll see you next week.